privilege and the fun of serving as chair of the Stimson Center's Board of Directors. A very, very warm welcome to all of you in the room today, as well as to everyone who is joining online. For more than 30 years, the Stimson Center has been at the forefront of research, policy analysis, and strategic engagement on the Indo-Pacific region. You'll find Stimson's Indo-Pacific experts in some very high-profile appearances, quoted in the New York Times, testifying on the Hill. But significantly, there are also times when you won't find them. And in many ways, that's where the real magic happens. Because when Stimson's experts are not in front of the camera, when they are not being quoted in major publications, it often means that they are engaged behind the scenes, working to broker communication and build solutions to some of the most complex, historic, and emerging challenges in the Indo-Pacific. They are building proprietary data tools and analyzing satellite imagery to increase transparency and accountability. They are hosting Track 2 dialogues that engage former military officials and diplomats together with academic and analyst communities. And they are conducting tabletop simulation exercises to help identify vulnerabilities and build greater strategic stability. The world of policymakers have long recognized the value that Stimson Center provides on the Indo-Pacific. Now, I, as chair, along with my colleagues, are committed to ensuring that a much wider community, a much greater number of groups and communities of practice, of people recognize this unparalleled expertise. To this end, I'm going to go ahead and steal Brian's thunder just a little bit to announce the launch of Stimson's new Indo-Pacific initiative. This announcement has actually been in the making for 30 years, but its opportunity right now is ripe as Stimson redoubles its efforts to meet both exciting and challenging new approaches in a region that is constantly changing, evolving, and shifting. With the world's eyes trained on major flashpoints in the Taiwan Strait, South China Sea, India Ocean, the Korean Peninsula, the stakes could not be higher in the Indo-Pacific. But there also are enormous opportunities, as Brian will explore today with Deputy Secretary of State Campbell. Stimson's Indo-Pacific Initiative will build upon its more than 3 decades of research, analysis, strategic engagement in the region to develop real-time analysis and solutions that respond to the problems of today and anticipate the challenges of tomorrow. With an interdisciplinary approach and a nimble and responsive activity, the Stimson Center is, in my opinion, unparalleled in its ability and position to drive a thoughtful and strategic research agenda in the Indo-Pacific. And what better moment to announce this initiative than at an event with one of the country's greatest minds on the Indo-Pacific. Deputy Secretary Campbell, we are honored that you are spending time with us today and have chosen to participate in this key event. It is our pleasure to have you here as we explore the greatest challenges and also the nascent opportunities across the Pacific. So with this, it's my pleasure to hand it off to my esteemed colleague who will moderate today's discussion, Brian Finley, who also serves as the Stimson Center President and CEO. Over to you, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. So Sue did steal my thunder by announcing our initiative, but that's the benefit of being the boss. You get to do that. Yeah. I'm really pleased and invigorated that this is happening right at this moment, Deputy Secretary. I think there is no better way, clearly, to launch an initiative like this than, as Sue mentioned, with really one of the greatest strategic thinkers on the Indo-Pacific. So it's really a great honor to have you, Deputy Secretary. I'm going to introduce this young man just really briefly to many, because many of you probably don't know. Okay. You probably don't know this. He, of course, was confirmed as the 22nd Deputy Secretary of State just this past February. He previously served on the NSC, running Indo-Pacific policy for the president. He's served in many different capacities, both in and out of government. He was the CEO and co-founder of the Asia Group. He co-founded the Center for New American Security. We'll forgive you for that one. And has, as I say, has had many honors, and he's written 10 books somehow in the course of his career. But as I say, sir, it's really a great pleasure to have you here. I just looked up, Mr. Secretary, the last time you appeared in public on this stage was 12 years ago. It was 12 years ago. And I pulled off of the Stimson website the brief summary of that discussion. And it said that you discussed issues related to the rise of China, rising tensions with North Korea, and Taiwanese elections. Yeah. So you may be able to recycle. You may be able to recycle some of that material here today. As I say, that was January of 2012. There was also actually a photo that accompanied that, but I didn't. You look exactly the same. Sure. You look exactly the same. So with your permission, Mr. Secretary, I thought what we would do is maybe just do a little tour, a quick tour of Asia. And I'd like to start really at the macro level. Some have argued that we are facing in the region really a two Asias problem, right? We have a security Asia and an economic Asia. And I think by virtually all measures with respect to security Asia, the United States has overperformed, right? We are, I think, continue to dominate that space clearly to the benefit of the United States and the world. China, however, is deeply integrated, clearly in Asia economically, that is clearly having an impact on the choices that our friends, partners, and would-be partners are making. And so a couple of quick questions on this. In light of this, I think there are those that argue that China's economic power and our attempts to limit it is short-sighted at best and counterproductive at worst, given the explosive growth that we have seen in China over the course of the past 2 decades. The IMF has raised concerns about our efforts in the United States creating, quote, a geoeconomic fragmentation of the Bretton Woods trade and financial system. Is this a legitimate concern?
So first of all, Brian, thank you. I just want to take a moment to say how great it is to be back here. I want to thank Sue and congratulate Stimson for launching this new initiative. I think it's exactly right. I think it's important just to pay a little recognition to people who came before, who've done so much. I see my good friend Barry Bleckman, who is probably the most innovative person who basically launched think tanks and how to think strategically about issues. I commend him for all the work that he's done. He's just been a tremendous professional and a wonderful friend for many years. I had a good opportunity to work with Monica. She's now with you here. She's a terrific person. Helped us think strategically about the oceans and how to step up our game in the Pacific. Many other people on your team, Brian, have been terrific. Bob Manning sends me ideas and suggestions and harangues me on a regular basis with suggestions about how to think about the Indo-Pacific and the world at large. And so I do commend you on the work that you guys are doing. And I think this initiative, if there are ways that we can help and support, I think the hardest and the most important thing is figuring out how to do work that's additive to already a body of think tank work and other initiatives that are critically important. There's a lot of work to be done, but trying to figure out how your role can be to add to that whole will be critical. I'll leave it to you guys to think that through. So look, it's Brian, you've got a variety of things in that question. I would simply say, I think if you look at the full nature of American diplomacy in the Indo-Pacific, it's much broader than just two lanes, the strategic or military lane and the economic lane. I think there are a range of issues diplomatically that are frankly unrelated to military power but are deeply significant, whether it's issues like we were just speaking about the oceans, whether it's certain kinds of engagements dealing with climate change or illegal fishing. There are a variety of initiatives in the Pacific and elsewhere the United States has played a major role. I do agree that the United States has worked closely with allies and partners on an Indo-Pacific strategy, which has many elements to it. But I think sometimes when we talk about economic issues, that the elements that are very strong with respect to American performance are either overlooked or diminished. We are still the largest investor in the region by a wide space. We are deeply engaged in every kind of project and innovation. We lead the way in technology more generally. We've tried to build and create new economic initiatives that basically respond both to the demand signal of the region, but also recognize some of the challenges in a bipartisan sense of traditional trade initiatives on both sides of the aisle in the United States. That's one of the reasons that we tried successfully with the launch of IPEF. I think some of the initiatives that we've worked on more recently address current issues like the security of supply chains, access to critical minerals, how to think about more carefully about standard setting with respect to technology and the like. These are all critical things for the Indo-Pacific in which I would argue the United States is already playing a very strong role more generally. So I have seen the critique from the IMF. I would simply say I do not believe it is American policy to somehow limit Chinese economic growth. I believe it is in American interests to take careful steps to restrict China's access to certain technologies that we believe are being used in ways that are antithetical to our interests, usually in the national security realm. It is also the case that there are some practices, such as using overcapacity in a variety of economic areas. Most recently, we've seen it in terms of electric vehicles, and then practice a kind of dumping in international markets, including the United States. And Brian, this is not theoretical. We've seen this happen before. A decade ago, the Chinese took steps both in terms of aluminum and iron, and those steps of unloading overcapacity in the United States and elsewhere did a lot of harm to our indigenous industries. And I think the president has made clear that as we are building up our EV capacities, we will protect them from what we believe, and I think we can clearly underscore are elements of overcapacity. And I would simply say that it is not just the United States. There are many other countries in Europe and elsewhere that are also concerned by these practices. I would also say that last year was a banner year in U.S.-China trade, and frankly, American strategic economic engagement across the region stepped up economic profiles in places like India, Vietnam, even with Japan, South Korea. And so I do believe that you are correct in pointing out that the traditional approaches like TPP and the like are severely challenged by domestic criticism, but at the same time, or concerns, at the same time, I think we stand ready to try to innovate, to find ways that further signal the strong intent, I think bipartisan intent, to keep the United States tethered to, engaged in the innovation, the important markets that are basically defining the world, which are found in the Indo-Pacific more generally. And so I think the key for us, and I'm sorry this is a long answer, is that our strategy has to be deeply multifaceted. It is not just investment in our traditional bilateral security alliances. It's seeking to link some of those alliances in innovative ways, like the work that we've done between the United States, Japan, and South Korea. It also means seeking opportunities for minilateral approaches, like the United States, Japan, Australia, and India. It means using key areas of advantage like technology to build new partnerships that really have set both India and Vietnam in particular on a very positive trajectory with respect to cooperation with the United States. It means working on the issues that matter associated with, again, standard setting and technology, how to think about how we advance joint efforts in cutting edge issues like AI and quantum, how to address constructively climate change, the health of the oceans. So I would say what we've sought to do across the board is implement a coherent, integrated strategy that sends an unmistakable signal of American purpose and commitment to the Indo-Pacific going forward. And I think that has been accomplished, but I will simply say, Brian, the only reward for hard work and putting sort of points on the board is the continuing need to do that again and again.
So let me stick close by and turn to some of the military strategic considerations. You alluded to them a little bit. We've seen recently China stepping up efforts with respect to military conversion against a U.S. ally, the Philippines, in the South China Sea. And in recent days, China has been found, as you are well aware, harassing ships inside Manila's EEZ, notably on the Second Thomas Shoal, Scarborough Shoal. I think that for years we have speculated about the possibility of open conflict between the United States and China erupting over Taiwan, over the Korean Peninsula, over a dangerous intercept by the Chinese. But it seems that we have refocused in recent weeks or months really in the South China Sea, and some are speculating that really has become the most acute flashpoint for potential conflict in the region. Do you agree with that?
So let me just simply say that I think the United States is vigilant to a variety of potential challenges across the Indo-Pacific, and our teams both at Pacific Command in Hawaii, at the Pentagon here in Washington, D.C., focus on a range of issues, whether it's the status of the line of actual control between China and India, whether it is provocation, gray zone provocations across the Taiwan Strait, whether it is persistent exercises between China and Russia around Japan, or as you indicate, heightened tensions with respect to the relationship between China and the Philippines. Look, I would simply say on this that we've made clear to both countries, the Philippines and China, the nature of our commitment to the maintenance of peace and stability, of freedom of navigation, of our commitment to the Philippines as a security partner. I think we've also had substantial interactions with partners and friends about what's taken place. We had the day after the summit between the United States and Prime Minister Kishida, we had an unprecedented meeting between Japan, the United States, and the Philippines. All three countries committed to an appropriate approach here. So the diplomacy is broad and deep, also with respect to ASEAN in terms of what we believe ASEAN steps should be to send an unmistakable message about concerns with respect to provocations in what is clearly the Philippines' waters more generally. Look, I think we have been very clear what our interests are. Secretary Austin was just in Shangri-La in Singapore and had substantial discussions with his counterpart among a number of issues, including these steps here. I think what I want to leave you with is that the United States is deeply focused on this. We've sent the clearest possible messages. I would also say, simply speaking, that President Marcos, who is an impressive leader, has made clear that he does not seek a crisis, that he wants dialogue and diplomacy with Beijing. We support that more generally, and we're looking for China to cease provocative activities against a key ally in the Indo-Pacific more generally. I would say at this juncture, the United States and China have taken substantial steps since the Woodside Summit to build more arenas of cooperation, of dialogue and discussion between the United States and China, and some areas of cooperation. I think the restarting of military efforts aimed at building instruments and starting venues where we can discuss crisis communications to prevent unintended escalation. Those are important steps, and we think that they will bear fruit in the next little while, and believe that China is also invested in trying to head off potential areas of misunderstanding. It doesn't mean that we're lowering our guard, but we think in the current environment, China's primary focus is on its economy and seeking to reassure investors and others that they have a plan for the way ahead. And I think I met with Executive Vice Foreign Minister Ma in Washington about a week and a half ago. And at least from those meetings, I think we still believe that China is determined to work in a way that stabilizes U.S.-China relations and not creates undue areas of friction and tension that can escalate in ways that are unpredictable and dangerous.
Let me push you a little bit more on China. 2019, you wrote in Foreign Affairs with Jake Sullivan and called for the establishment of a framework, essentially to manage what you called a competitive coexistence with China. Recently, Matt Pottinger and Mike Gallagher wrote in that same journal saying that management of this relationship is folly, and that our policy aim really should be outright victory over the Chinese. And that may mean working provocatively to create the conditions to get rid of the CCP. Have you changed your opinion?
So look, I have enormous regard for Matt and Representative Gallagher, and Matt has actually given me great counsel. But I think one of the benefits of our system is that we have an ability to debate and to disagree. I would simply say if you read that article carefully and you look at the specific steps that both of them recommend in terms of our overall approach, not the outcome, and I understand what you're asking about the outcome, but if you look at the steps that they are laying out, they're almost identical to what we are doing already. And so I would simply say, with respect to the specifics of the constructions of elements of strategy, we are undertaking a policy which I believe shares broad bipartisan support, and I think that is the case. I would simply say that part of a strategy which is based on allies and partners, which our strategy is, working closely, not in a paternalistic way, but true listening partnership with countries that we regard as vital to our strategic purpose. It means listening to them. I think it would be fair to say that most of our partners and allies have different memories of previous policies of regime change in the United States. I think they would view those as largely unsuccessful, and they would be highly critical of an effort to depart along this path. Secondly, I think one of the things that I tried to write in an early article with my friend and colleague Rush Doshi was that for years we have overestimated our ability to fundamentally influence the direction of Chinese foreign policy, or even the constructs of how it sees the world and how it undergoes its policy formulations. And so I think we have to have a high degree of modesty of what we think is possible with respect to fundamental changes in how China sees the world. And so most of our strategy that we've sought to develop, and I think this is the biggest difference, if I can say, is to construct a higher degree of confidence among like-minded states that we are determined to maintain elements of what I might call the operating system of Asia that we played a huge role in helping to develop, which has led to unprecedented peace and stability, innovation, and in some respects the 40 best years in the entire history of the Indo-Pacific. Now, sometimes Chinese friends refer to this as containment. We reject that. This is much more about sustaining an approach that we believe has been actually very good for all the countries in the Indo-Pacific, including China. And so that overall strategy is seeking to shape primarily our views and our policies in rather than seeking some sort of end game along the lines that Matt Pottinger and Representative Gallagher have laid out. I would say that the biggest difference between what I would call the Trump approach and the Biden approach is I think both were correct, and we give the Trump administration enormous credit for appropriately diagnosing the challenges that we were facing from China. But I think the primary approach that the Trump administration followed was a go-it-alone foreign policy. Very suspicious and sometimes very negative on allies, lots of threats about pulling forces out and major economic steps against countries that we're working closely with now. And so I think the biggest innovation of the Biden presidency has been working much more closely with allies and partners, not just in the Indo-Pacific, but linking those efforts with Europe. For instance, if you look at some of the biggest supporters of Ukraine, they are found in the Indo-Pacific. That's a remarkable achievement. And I think those patterns and habits of cooperation have been significant, and many countries in the Indo-Pacific would say quietly this is probably the golden age. And so I think the biggest difference between sort of a Biden and Trump approach is not this question about end games, because I think that's an exaggerated aspect of what is possible, but more in the tactics. And I think our determination to work with allies and partners does stand in some contrast with some of the go-it-alone, America first approaches that we've seen discussed more recently and were put on display during his time in office.
So just briefly, Secretary, do you find the debate over regime change itself, is that productive or is it reckless?
Look, I would venture to say that I think that element at this time is reckless and likely unproductive. I do think we need to accept China as a major player, and that doing constructive diplomacy with them is in American strategic interests, and that there are a number of areas that frankly we are destined and determined that we need to not necessarily work together. We don't have that much with respect to habits of cooperation, but aligning our policies, understanding what the other is doing, can be stabilizing. And so I think that's where I would put most of my focus. I would also say that the world is dangerous and unpredictable enough right now, with a raging war in Central Europe, with uncertainties in Gaza and Israel, the challenges in the Red Sea, major famines in parts of Africa. If you add all of those things up, it is a major test for American foreign policy. And I do not believe it is in our interest at the current juncture to add to our list. Let's try to topple the other leading power on the global stage, despite our differences. I do think at the current juncture it makes more sense to both prepare, be capable with allies and partners, send clear signals of areas where we have red lines and concerns, but also do what you can to coexist in a manner that does not compromise our interests or the interests of our allies and partners.
So let me turn to another major power in the region. Big elections in India last week. If you would give me another hour up here, I'd like to get your views on that.
Sure.
But maybe just cutting to the chase, we've seen some speculation in the press over kind of growing attempts between India and China to a little bit hit the reset button in their relationship, find some accommodation in what has been obviously a tense relationship. Is Washington supportive of this?
So look, I think the truth is that any time two countries can find a degree of the common space to reduce tensions, I think we have to support that. Look, I think we are very proud of the steps that we've taken over the last several years to basically elevate the U.S.-India relationship. I've worked on India for decades. I've never seen as much progress as we've seen in recent years, and there are many reasons for that. It is not only American support to India when they face challenges along the line of actual control. Another kudos, bouquet to the Trump administration. We've followed up on that in a variety of ways. We've worked closely with India, again, at the Quad. In many respects, they are the leading nation in the Quad, frankly. They help drive initiatives. After being initially reluctant, they are now fully embracing of the potential. We've worked assertively in technology. I'll be with Jake Sullivan in India next week as we advance areas of coordination with India here. And so I think we feel very good about this partnership, the people-to-people, the connecting with our diaspora and the like. I think there are some structural issues between China and India that frankly will be difficult to resolve. I think from an Indian perspective, they are going to demand and expect from any rapprochement or substantial improvement in relations differences with respect to how China treats the contested borders and its steps that they've taken. I think one of the things that we've seen under Xi Jinping on anything that bridges or touches territorial matters, I think it's very hard for the Chinese to show any flexibility or any desire to find common ground. I think we wish the Indians well in deliberations, but in truth, we're very confident and comfortable about the state of our bilateral relationship, and we want that to continue going forward. And the president engaged Prime Minister Modi almost immediately after the election. We're looking forward to continuing work with them, and I'll just stand with that.
Do you think that the remarkable resilience of democracy in India gives them a leg up in their competition with the Chinese?
I do, and there obviously are issues that have been raised in U.S.-India relations, some concerns, but at the same time, we have to recognize that what India just experienced was the most successful democratic experiment and demonstration in modern history, and that's just remarkable. And note that Prime Minister Modi accepted the outcomes. This was thought to be an extremely effective demonstration of a democratic machinery. I do believe that if you ask me, what country is going to be most important to take the steps for the United States to build a strong relationship for the 21st century, without any hesitation, I would put India at the top of that list. And I believe that there is growing strategic alignment. There's enormous interests at the people-to-people level. And I'm finding that among a younger generation of Indian interlocutors, some of the previous inhibitions or concerns or grudges are not as significant. And that's same on the U.S. side as well. I think there is a growing group of people who recognize that a deep strategic engagement with India is in our best strategic interests, and there isn't the bifurcation that we've seen in the past, India, Pakistan. We engage India on its own and on its own merits and approach. And so I think because of some of those changes, we're going to be able to work more together in everything. Clean energy, the security of the Indian Ocean, we're going to be doing more with them on those issues. We're working more on co-production, and I would say that American technology companies view India as really the next frontier, and that has been one of the major arenas of cooperation between our two sides.
So they, the Indians, are also building a new submarine base in the Bay of Bengal, and presumably that is going to house it's a home for their sea-based nuclear deterrent. What's Washington's view on this?
Look, I'm not going to make any specific. I think we respect India as a military player. Our cooperation and engagement has gone up substantially in the Indian Ocean in particular. I think our primary areas of concern on military basing remain substantial, ambitious plans on the part of China to build a far-flung, sort of integrated network of overseas bases that I think we have some concerns about.
I want to take you to North Korea now. So you left the Obama administration holding in part, of course, the North Korea file on the NSC and then, or rather as Assistant Secretary, and then returned to it in the Biden administration when you were on the NSC. And in that intervening period, right, we had President Trump and his summit diplomacy with the North Koreans. Did that advance? Did it give us a little report card? Were we further ahead when you picked up the file again? Or had we lost ground? Where were we?
It's difficult to make major judgments about the effectiveness of the attempts by President Trump and Kim Jong-un to really advance bilateral relations because the diplomacy ended so abruptly in Vietnam. Now coming up on, almost 6-7 years ago. And basically since the decision to basically cut short that interaction, President Trump decided to go home. Basically since that point, we've had almost no interaction after many attempts between Washington and Pyongyang. We've tried a number of venues. We've tried through other countries. We've sent careful messages about a desire to re-engage on issues of critical importance. We've talked to them at moments of need and uncertainty about COVID. I think it would be fair to say, Brian, that we've had no luck with any of those diplomatic outreach efforts more generally. Our primary way of sending messages to North Korea is ensuring that they see the strongest possible trilateral coordination between the United States, Japan, and South Korea. And that has really innovated in just a short period of time. And the level of coordination among our three, both politically, diplomatically, strategically, militarily, is frankly quite impressive. And that determination on the part of Seoul and Tokyo is very well noted. Look, I think you've seen in recent, and frankly, Stimson is one of the places that has done the most interesting work, looking at how North Korea appears to be changing its views about whether it's seeking unification. They are basically looking at North Korea as a separate state. They have embarked on a very ambitious and we would view provocative set of relations with Russia, in which they've provided artillery and missiles in ways that we think are destabilizing and concerning. We have raised those concerns directly with China, and we also have focused on them deeply. You probably know we had a trilateral out on our farm about 2 weeks ago, with a week and a half with the Koreans and Japanese partners. That was one of the most important topics we discussed. And so so again, I guess I would say, Brandon, it's hard to evaluate the ultimate effectiveness at the time when Kim Jong-un and President Trump met. I would simply say in the current environment, we have very little to show for it, and frankly, it's difficult for me to envision how we're going to get back on any kind of engagement with Pyongyang, given current circumstances, and we are constantly vigilant for potential provocations or steps against our South Korean partners, and we've discussed various scenarios and areas for more integration, more coordination closely with both Japan and with South Korea and Japan.
So you may have pre-answered this question, Secretary. Earlier this year, several administration officials, including one of your deputy assistant secretaries, mentioned the possibility of some interim steps toward denuclearization. And I wonder if you could give us a little color as to what that might.
So, look, I obviously saw the stories. I would simply say I think some of those stories were taken out of context, and I don't think they fully reflected where the U.S. position remains, which is we are committed to a full, comprehensive denuclearization of North Korea. I think, Brian, again, just important to underscore, literally we have had no communication of any sort or dialogue with North Korea in years. And we are not alone in that. Basically, North Korea has had very constricted engagements with a very small number of countries who, for armistice reasons, had a presence in North Korea. Some of those countries have come back, some have not. What they have done is doubled down on a much stronger relationship with Russia. I think that has caused some anxieties in Beijing, but those are its two patrons and strongest supporters. There are a number of other countries that have sort of glancing engagements, but really nothing with South Korea, nothing with Japan, nothing with the United States. And so I think it's premature to get into any steps or thinking that we would do. Our policy remains the same.
So looking here at my boss, Monica Medina, I have to ask this question. You have said from time to time that one of the biggest challenges facing this is IUU fishing, illegal fishing in the region, which is an economic challenge, it's a security challenge, and particularly to many of our friends and allies in the region. When you were on the NSC, you published a quite remarkable memorandum calling for an all-government approach to address IUU fishing. Tell me what the State Department's doing and what more the State Department is planning on doing on this issue.
Yeah, so the leader in this effort, I'd like to take credit, really was Monica, who really helped engage a broad group in the U.S. government, helping us understand that this was not just a sideline issue, but it went to the heart of sustainable fisheries, concerns about economic issues, sustenance across many countries in the Pacific. And I think as we looked at this, one of the things that we have seen are vast fleets, almost the vast majority of them coming from China, that are basically sailing and overfishing many corners of the global ocean. What we've tried to do in some specific areas, for instance, the Quad has put together a number of initiatives that are about providing the Pacific and Southeast Asia with greater awareness of their maritime domain using new capabilities. And so in the past, what illegal fisher groups would often do is just turn off their transponder and then sail in unaccosted. We're using new capabilities and technologies that make that impossible, and then innovating a variety of steps, law enforcement steps, that at least help us take steps to identify and to support local actors as they seek to prosecute illegal fishing. So we have an initiative called a shipwriter agreement, where if a Coast Guard vessel has an appropriate national from a Pacific Island nation, then that vessel can take law enforcement steps on behalf of the country involved. And that initiative has been very successful in parts of the Pacific. I think the harder thing, Brian, is that it's not just China, but China is the leader, is that they have understood the cracks in the ocean regime, how to do illegal fishing in ways that there are no real penalties. Yes, you get a ticket and an admonition, but there are no real global penalties. We're going to have to do more there. I believe, and again, I give Monica enormous credit here, this is an issue that is going to gain in importance. We're going to we started an initiative called the Partners of the Blue Pacific. The Pacific Ocean region describes its gathering its brotherhood as the Blue Pacific grouping. We have tried to bring in a number of countries who have interests in supporting the needs of the Pacific Islanders. United States, Australia, who's been our lead, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, countries in Europe, to try to make sure that we're focused on these issues. All of those countries have capabilities and areas that they want to support. And the two issues that are on everyone's list is more to support resilience in terms of climate change, and two, what critical steps can we take to help countries police their vast ocean domains. So I think these are critical steps. Much more needs to be done on an urgent basis. And I would simply say that one of your earlier good questions was this division between sort of traditional national security and economic. As you travel the Pacific and Southeast Asia, you will find increasingly a broader definition of what security means. And for many of these countries, climate change is the most urgent, but frankly, their livelihoods, which are largely based on healthy sea stocks, are being challenged on a daily basis. And so we have to do more here. And I will say, I'll use the word again, what China is doing with respect to overfishing is reckless and contrary to the interests of all these countries who are looking for much more sustainable fisheries. And that, it's hard to describe, Brian, when one of these convoys comes through, it can be literally dozens of giant fishing vessels, and they will plow through an area and literally fish everything out of a water in a 50 or 100 mile square area in ways that leave the place basically without fish and resources. And so these are steps that have to be addressed in international arenas. Awareness has to be raised. We will be discussing it at the UN at the Partners of the Blue Pacific, and our determination will be to continue to work on this in a way that brings allies and partners with us.
How did you do, Monica? Okay, you did well. All right, okay. Just to warn you and the audience here, we're going to take we're going to try to collect a couple of questions while you are getting the attention of my colleague at the back of the room. If you are interested in asking a question, let me try to squeeze one more quick one in, if I can. I want to talk about NATO's engagement in the Indo-Pacific. And in light, you've got a big summit coming up. Yeah. Mind your manners at the table when you win. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what impact NATO has had and what impact you hope NATO will have in the region, particularly in light of the fact that their attention is turned to another issue at the moment on the continent.
So look, NATO in many respects is a consensus organization. I think there is very broad agreement of how important the Indo-Pacific is to everything. I don't believe that NATO is looking for more out-of-area missions at this juncture, but they certainly appreciate and believe that countries in the Indo-Pacific have had a profound impact on the security of Central Europe. And so I would say that the two countries that have done the most to support Russia's retooling, reconstitution since its first, really failed steps at an invasion have been China and North Korea. And so I believe those issues will be discussed in full when NATO meets for its 75th anniversary here in Washington in mid-July. I think there's broad agreement on that. There's also an agreement that there are common challenges, disinformation, cybersecurity, that we will be discussing together. I think there is an understanding in NATO that we have to tread carefully with respect to future dialogues and discussions in the Indo-Pacific. We believe that having the four AP4 countries with us in July is appropriate, and that we'll hear their perspectives about how the Indo-Pacific is more linked to Europe than ever before. But at the same time, we are not seeking to send a message somehow of a regional extra new mission on the part of NATO in the Indo-Pacific. That is not in the cards most directly, and a number of countries in Europe have made clear that those views are understood more generally. That doesn't mean that there isn't much work to be done, and there is, and some of this is just building greater understanding about the nature of security challenges in both places, attacking common issues that affect all the countries in the Indo-Pacific and Europe, and then just building more connectivity more generally. And so I think that's some of what we're looking to do, and we're excited. I came from a breakfast this morning as we're preparing for the AP or the IP4 leaders to come to Washington next month.
Thank you for that. I'm going to turn to my colleague. The Deputy Secretary assured me in advance before we walked into the room he does not need to know where you went to high school, but if you could give him your name and affiliation and a very brief question so that we can maybe take a couple of questions, Justine, if that's all right, before we turn back to the Deputy Secretary for a response. Sir.
Deputy Secretary Prashant Jha of the Hindustan Times. On India, two questions. Do you think public controversies are leading to the perception of a drift in the relationship? And it's been difficult for you to sustain the momentum that was generated by Prime Minister Modi's state visit. The second, are there limits to the relationship and cooperation in the relationship because of your export control regime? And does that inhibit the kind of technology and defense cooperation you can embark on?
Yeah.
Hold that thought,
Those are
sir.
good questions.
Hold that thought, sir. We're going to take maybe just one or two more if we can't, just to test your...
Okay.
It is a report that Russian President Vladimir Putin going to visit North Korea sooner or later. So how do you see that President Putin's visit to North Korea, and then how much do you concern that deepening relations between Russia and North Korea, and how do you react to these different relations?
Could we do one more?
Sure. I'm just going
I'm
to help.
I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you.
One more question about North Korea. I'm a reporter with VOA. So North Korea has been ramping up its trash balloon operations against South Korea. Do you see any possibility that this could turn into more serious provocation?
So look, on the last question, we're always vigilant about potential steps that go beyond simply sending trash to the other side. I can tell you this, we've coordinated very closely with South Korean friends. We have condemned with South Korea these steps, and we believe that South Korea is appropriately prepared for a number of potential provocations, and we are joined in the closest possible partnership with Seoul in this set of endeavors. So I think the answer is we're always vigilant, and we're watching carefully what's taking place in Pyongyang. There are some changes in their policy approaches, and those are being studied carefully. To your very good question, look, I won't comment about reports about a possible visit. There hasn't been one in a long time, but we too have seen the reports of a possible engagement of President Putin in North Korea. I think what we are primarily concerned by, we have a very good understanding of what North Korea has provided Russia, and they have had a substantial impact on the battlefield. And it is a subject of concern, and it has been discussed widely both in the EU and NATO. But I think we also have to recognize that there is the other part of this relationship, and that means what is Russia going to provide in exchange to North Korea? Hard currency? Is it energy? Is it capabilities that allow them to advance their nuclear or missile products? We don't know, but we're concerned by that and watching carefully. And so I think it would be fair to say that the entire scope of the Russia-North Korea relationship is something that we follow carefully and are concerned by. And then, so look, I myself, things happen in a bilateral relationship, particularly between democracies. Prime Minister Modi had his campaign. We have some politics in ours as well. I would simply say that both countries are deeply committed to sustaining the upward trajectory of our bilateral relationship. And I believe we remain ambitious for what we want to accomplish across the board. And those areas of cooperation will include things in technology. And we do believe that there are some practices and some steps that have been in place for a long time that are no longer relevant to the U.S.-India relationship, and that we need to move beyond them to find new areas of cooperation and partnership. And I think that's going to be one of the issues that National Security Advisor Sullivan will be talking to his Indian counterparts about. So we want to take those steps to advance the relationship, to make sure that that momentum is unmistakable. And we are quite bullish on the U.S.-India relationship, yes.
So, Mr. Secretary, knowing that your next appointment is across town on Capitol Hill, I'm sure you'd be very happy to stay here for another hour. But those are my words, not yours.
I can take two more.
You can take two more. Excellent.
I'll do quick.
Two more quick questions. We're going to get a microphone to you. Thoughts? We'll go here and here.
Stanley Kober, on economic security and expanded security. In 1812, we declared war on Britain. We were fed up with the orders in council. We escalated from economic warfare to military warfare. If we could do it to Britain, why couldn't China do it to us?
Okay.
I'll take that one. And we'll do one more over here. Sorry. You caught us off guard.
That's all right.
Nicely done. Nicely done.
Hi, Ken Moriyasu from Nikkei Asia. You talked about calls for regime change in China as reckless, and I understand that stability is the focus. But in the long run, is the new world order that Xi Jinping envisions, is it possible to coexist with the current rules-based international order?
So we have coexisted with other systems or other approaches before. This is not unique to us. I think the most important steps that we can take are developing stronger partnerships with like-minded states, building more capabilities domestically in the United States. That means investing in technology, rebuilding elements of our military supply chains, and basically developing the essential lines of communications of trust and confidence with allies and partners. I believe those are the fundamental steps. And so my primary answer to you is to focus more on the constructive steps that we would take among the community of nations that are determined to sustain elements, again, of this operating environment that we believe have been so beneficial to the countries of the Indo-Pacific more directly. And I think I'll just rest on that, and I think that's our overall approach going forward. I will say that U.S.-China relations are going to be challenging under the best of circumstances, right? And this gets back to the good question about, like, I think the difference between, say, the United States and the Soviet Union, previous periods of interaction with other countries, it would be hard to describe two countries that have as much interdependence as the United States and China. And so the interesting thing is that not only is our independence quite deep and profound, but it runs both ways. So it's very hard for China to take certain steps without harming its own economy. And I think we now understand that economic performance is central right now to what is important to President Xi. I think it is also the case that not only are we deeply connected and share interdependence, it is also the case that both countries are uncomfortable with many elements of that interdependence. We focus primarily on the U.S. role, what we're doing in terms of small yard, high fence, and we tend to overlook that in many respects the driving force of trying to create a degree of sort of economic exclusion and reverse areas of vulnerability with some of the speeches that Xi Jinping has talked about, dual circulation and making other countries more vulnerable to China more directly, that it is China that is driving some of these areas. I think the hope will be that we'll be able to settle on certain things that are necessary for the sustainment of the global economy, that are unexceptional with respect to national security, but at the same time create more, we're going to need to create more redundancy in the global system, more generally, more sources of supply for everything that's important. That is a challenging task in and of itself. We're in the midst of that now. Ultimately, that requires both strengthening, extending, and also careful coexistence. And that's really the nature of the diplomatic challenge that we have in front of us. It is one of the most difficult challenges in the history of American foreign policy. And, the hopes will be, with the help of good places like Stimson, that we'll be able to think through some of the challenges ahead. So I'm grateful, Brian, for the chance to be with you today. I thank you all for your good questions.
Well, sir, as you know, this is an organization that is aggressively nonpartisan, but I think whatever your political persuasion, one cannot deny that you have been a remarkable servant to the American people. So I want to thank you for that and ask my colleagues to thank you for joining us.